share a stage with someone who's just, had such a legacy. And, I mean, can we give it up for Justin and Nicole and just Jesse, all these really great Flagstaff, ambassadors. Waxwing is the best journal in America, hands down. Shout out to Waxwing. Shout out to G and Shante for coming. I'm reading an excerpt of a novel, and it's based on South Carolina. It's a crime novel. But what it is kind of like, coming up in South Carolina, a lot of my friends were in and out of prison. But a lot of the women, too, a lot of the women I knew were, some of them are in prison for, kidnap and murder. Some of them for prostitution. Some of them are, were drug traffickers, So to me, that world wasn't fantasy. It was the culture of South Carolina. And so a lot of this novel is, I'm hoping to kind of explore the nature of what is a crime and when does crime begin. Is a crime an extension of when someone gets arrested? Or is crime an expression of patriarchy and slavery in South Carolina? So when does the crime begin? Because I've seen a lot of these people where they make the news for something really atrocious, but I remember when they were sexually abused or the things they go through. So you see the echo effect. So a lot of it is like a crime novel to explore that. And this isn't the main character, this is just the catalyst for an exploration of how various women in South Carolina deal with this killing. I don't really have an official title yet, but this is called A Tree of Funerals. Plain light seeped like deer's blood to the dense Houston fog. Dakota's flight was delayed, canceled, rebooked, delayed. Her first flight out of Greenville, South Carolina had been an hour late, a mechanical delay. She closed her eyes and breathed in slowly, the way her daddy taught her in the hunter's blind decades ago, as she did last night when the final gunshot pierced the lung of Leroy Fontaine. On the airport televisions, Trump and Clinton endlessly looped, and all around employees in Halloween ensembles, Black Wonder Woman, a bunny rabbit, Harry Potter. The costumes moved against the fog that has swirled about her since the shooting, a speedball of delirium and adrenaline. So fitting for her life to end like this, a sideshow punctuated by a carnival. Dakota examined her hand, the outline of rings removed, the scratch the thorns left, knuckles swollen from digging. She clutched the ticket as tightly as she had gripped the shovel hours before. The shovel unlocked the South Carolina earth, the ticket, an unknown world. Her next flight home to Tucson, delayed to the afternoon. Now she was debating rerouting, contemplating if the police were waiting for her on the desert tarmac, if she should leave the country now, while there was still a chance. Everything now felt strangely clean. There was no blood on her passport. She slid her documents back into her purse, stood up and began to wander the terminals. Children scrambled to take a picture with the TSA agent dressed like Wonder Woman. Dakota's desire for a drink, for a smoke, was satiated by their laughter. Even now, with their life seemingly over, she couldn't find it in herself to take a drink. It seemed like a second death, a betrayal of this life lost. She had arrived here through a series of hard choices. So what relief would that easy one be? Sober, she seldom felt anything but numb. It was in dream and drink that her emotions poured out, and with them, her regrets and hope, all best kept sealed. She floated like Taran on the river Styx, conveying from airport store to airport store, loosely flipping through magazines, monitoring the television, scanning the sea of election coverage for the shark fin of news of his killing. She sat at the airport bar, picking at her cuticle and contemplating a Clinton win, to face her execution under the first woman president, or if Trump won, the Confederate graves of her youth opening up, serpents and algae slave chains emerging from their barren skulls, to feel the world burn from behind the walls of a prison cell, not even a bird to visit her, a coffin wrapped in prison orange, nailed shut with tears. Her eyes scanned the young college girls drinking and taking selfies next to her, pouty lips, sexy boots. Like death, she thought, beauty was currency, and you had to spend it while you had it. At 40, her beauty was more raw, more of the earth and the fire of youth. When she was a young girl switching her Doc Martens for long boots in the strobe light hypnotica of strip clubs, she thought she'd be young forever, cash falling softly as the mist outside the terminal window, spinning and spinning till everything was cold and blank. She dropped acid before slipping on her pasties and hitting the stage. The customers would glow like bioluminescent kelp as the psychedelia bloomed, her body and theirs ceasing to be real, becoming something closer to death or galaxy. The Milky Way spiraling into dollar bills to the twists of her aura. How naive she was then, before Leroy Fontaine drew the embers of his lust to the glass pipe of her life, before she was trapped in the respiratory system of his underworld. She was smoke of the dance floor of his lips, so close to heaven before he breathed her back in. As the bar grew crowded, Dakota moved her plate to a solitary table with a view of the rushing crowd. She felt better facing what was coming. When she first landed in Greenville last week, she felt immobilized by the weight of her niece's death. Her niece, Shiloh, so resembled her in youth, Santa Muerte had seen her niece's reflection in her sky and confused her for Dakota. She knew how much her niece looked up to her, how Shiloh was planning to stay with her on the way to California. If she had known how involved her niece had become, she'd have flown her out sooner. She hated herself for that. That she only returned to South Carolina for funerals. That her family was a tree of caskets. Sleeping on the futon in her old room in her daddy's cluttered trailer, she felt less like the sober, strong woman she was in Tucson than the teenager who fled out that window into the moonlit kudzu. It was only when she stepped before her niece's casket and saw her there, angelic in black dress, and kissed her cold, scarred hands, that the fear faded and the anger took over. When everyone met up to drink and eat, she went to the barn where her daddy's gun rested in a box and slid it into her purse. There was a time she knew all the club owners and DJs, and to the DJs, all the drug dealers, the ones who flossed, the ones who stealthed, and a time when she had left it all behind, disappearing west and bedding with ranchers and marijuana farmers. Then slowly, like an ice cube melting, she became one with the earth of normal life. And from that water flowered a life of work and community and simple grace. Spin classes, art shows, and a cactus garden in the backyard, neither high nor low, just as flat as the stream of her transformation. To word came of the funeral, the death of her niece, the mystery that no one talked about. It was an overdose, but it was not an accident. The skeleton king had tightened his chains and squeezed so there was nothing left, the way he had with all of them. the way he had almost done with her. How big Leroy had been, beautiful, terrifying, slumped in his Chevy Impala, coiled in smoke like a dragon, waiting for her to finish her shift. The acid and MDMA had become uppers and opiates. He controlled the chemical rise and fall of her body, as if the sun was a pocket watch clutched in his palm, and every milligram was a second ticking. She was just a mountain kid in the city, a youth who hopped out a trailer park window into a station wagon bound for downtown. Her daddy would say mountain kids were a symbol for the grandeur of myth. Embryos caked in red clay and magnolia petals, buckshot and seance, prayers swallowed by Confederate smoke. It sounded like the poetic musings of a war vet deep in drink until the killing. But now she understood what her daddy meant, saw how the humidity of South Carolina boiled something primordial from the soul, how it made such good Marines, and why so much war was cooked in its kitchen. She understood now the violence of its children and its weather oppressed as patriarchy, bipolar in its swing of sunshine and storm, were born from the same torment of a land at war with itself. She understood now what she was seeking in Leroy then. She saw in him the myth her daddy spoke of. And in that myth, the salvation from the oppression of a trailer park life. She scraped the plastic container, felt the last grains of grits dissolve on her tongue, feeling the need to hold its flavor, its memory as long as she could. Then she rose. She rolled her single bag to the bathroom and stood before the mirror, examining her reflection. She searched the image, searched for some sign of his killing. Nothing. Just a deceiving stillness. But as she looked closer and pulled her hair back, examining her profile, she saw in the reflection that she moved differently. She knew her body still drew lust, but it felt somehow more hers now than it had ever been before. Her beauty had been a contract with others that broke when they looked away. She had lost her body, a word, a touch at a time, woven into someone else's fingertips, like cigarette smoke. But here now, with Leroy's soul severed from his body, she felt for the first time truly in hers. So strange, she thought, the end of life would be the beginning of the body. She fixed her hair and applied a flesh glaze of lip balm. She pissed and scrolled to the photos on her phone. Many she had full-heartedly snapped from photo albums at her mom's house over the funeral weekend. She deleted them one by one before clicking on delete all. Her life had been a movie theater lobby, a multiplex of options, filled with posters of coming events. But now it felt like she was sitting in a dark theater as the credits rolled, waiting for the lights to flick on. Outside the stall, a clack of heels, boots passing, the final image of Leroy Fontaine vanished. She flushed and rolled her suitcase back into the flurry of travelers. Those years, that life, that delirium of pills and needles, the soft shimmer of eyelash blinks on opiates, the sheen of chemical sweat that glazed her gaunt face. On the monitor, all the places of her past were being announced: Vegas, Portland, Atlanta, each like its own tombstone. And the TSA voice, the tour guide of her necropolis. The last night in Vegas marked the start of her 30th year. She rose from the tangle of limbs and leaned over the dress of the dream, the celebration's remaining lines. Her body and interstate lighting up as the cocaine set the traffic jam of her thoughts in motion. Outside the lights of Vegas Galactic, sweat beaded down the air strip of her scars like tiny planes rise into a final perfect high. This is it, she said. I'm done. And she was. Not another line or another needle. She was Arizona bound. The flights to Atlanta and Vegas flickered to cancel, everything frozen with the flow of memory. All rivers trace the mountain spring of Leroy Fontaine's image. It was always him, even when it wasn't. How long would it be before the cops or one of his men found him? Before they came for her? Or were the police descending now, or would they arrive months later with boots splintering wood? Or silent with knock, plain clothes and a badge, a mystery on their tongue, scented of nightmares and potassium chloride? Or she, just a leaf in this forest of an endless pollination of his enemies, forced to live a life on the wind, forever, looking over her shoulder? She felt twinges of paranoia each time she heard the TSA announcement about reporting strange behavior in bags. She sat down against the wall and began charging her phone. She didn't want to foster too much hope or despair. Even was imperative. He had enemies, endless enemies. Old families, outlaws, biker gangs, cops. And now even cartel in the years of her absence. She didn't have to close her eyes to see him. Half concealed in the sun-softened earth, maggots bloomed like a lotus from the mud of his tongue. The path she nimbled through those dark corner woods was familiar, even with the moon in sabbatical. How much thinner and consumed he seemed, sitting on the porch, with his eyes coarse with power, like a tree burning endlessly. The creak of rocking chair, the smell of moonshine sharp on the damp air, the air of madness that Confederate general uniform he wore evoked, the smell of gun oil and shaved wood, tobacco and chimney smoke, and something rotting, the flicker through the window of porn on a projector, of girls like her niece. She stood there, hands in the pockets of her long coat, looking up at the porch where he sat, his mountain manor engulfed in kudzu half under construction, the other half in ruin. Her head shadowed in hood, how deep that pain was, how kinetic it made each step, tears like chalk around the corpse of their union. Yet, watching a father pull a hoodie over his crying daughter and lifting her into his arms and race to make a flight, London-bound, she thought how relative agony was, how meaningless her pain was to them, and theirs to her. They might connect to the death of a celebrity, which contained all the rooms of their pain like a hotel, but the pain that truly defined us is a pain we face alone. The way Leroy and her were alone when she slid the .45 from her coat pocket, her heart beating against the cloth of her funeral dress, a shiver on the skin that wrapped around the collarbone he had once shattered, her hair graying beneath the brown, spreading like a wildfire, like the truth. The gun wasn't enough. Nothing ever was. The shot shook her and he stumbled from his chair, grasping the wound. She stepped towards the steps and fired again and again till the gun was empty, then slid the knife from her left pocket and punctured his neck and shielding hands. After crossing the county line with the wet blade, she saw the flicker of a trash fire coming from a dilapidated trailer park, turned in and dumped her bloody dress into the flames. As a group of kids nodding on oxy transmuted her flicker into their delirium. As she sat there watching the planes idle in the mist, she wasn't sure the moments after his death. Or more so the moments after she shoved the last bit of red clay over his body and the moonlight no longer shimmered from the blood pooling from his neck. His knee and one hand sticking out from the mulch that she loosely shoveled some leaves over. The owl and the willow tree, the final witness to the death of a crime god that had destroyed everything she loved. The last certain image, her turning to see the teeth of his smile, grinning, glistening through the mud, and slung the shovel down till the teeth sunk into wet darkness. Korean students raced past with medical masks over their mouths, rolling floral luggage. A Jamaican woman settled in a massage chair, stiff with time. If the passengers around Dakota had glanced, they'd have seen the yoga sticker on her suitcase and thought perhaps she was an instructor or a student. They would not see how she had dumped her car in overgrowth of kudzu and walked trance-like through the woods, dark forest dappled with starlight, royal sunrise and cold air on chapped lips, blood on funeral dress. That vengeance was fertile and minstrel in its cycles. Feeling restless, she unplugged her phone and headed in the direction of the Interfaith Chapel, trying to figure out what to do next, trying to map out the moments after death. It was all blurs as she cut her path to the main road. She'd woken up sick in the hotel and made her way nebulous to the car and drove until the countryside became strange and abstract. Where she had dumped the car and the gun in the back of a logging trail, walked to the next town and hitched a ride to the Greenville-Spartanburg Airport. In all variations, she ended up here at George Bush International Airport, fate suspended in fog. She walked defiant as the planes turned back. Their song interrupted halfway, like Leroy's steps towards her before the fall. Thinking how the knife can find its groove like a record needle. That the end of every gun is an Alden or a spring where you keep the arms of the palm bearer tight and the floor's coffers filled. That your tragedy is someone else's overtime. That your overtime is someone else's tragedy. That all death is economy. That a bullet doesn't just take a life, but transforms everything around it. Like a stranger's kiss transforms bloodlines, the way the mist transformed into rain, then flowers falling as delicate as her heart in youth, cold as her heart as she pulled the trigger. The sway of her arms in rhythm with the rain. She slowed her pace and paused before a gathered crowd. TSA agents rushed past, parting the wall of people. There's a young white woman on the ground convulsing. The other two white girls she was with were noticeably intoxicated, one crying, the other laughing. She felt sympathy for the girl on the ground, but embarrassed for them. She was like them once. And though the image of Leroy's body was slicing through her like kidney stones, seeing this, she was glad she was sober. There was no crushed Xanax to powder this corpse, no Valium nor ketamine to apply like makeup over the gray of the flesh. This death was naked inside of her. And with the rain falling faster and the lights cancellation flickering like apparitions, she thought of herself all those lifetimes ago, naked beneath her bathrobe, lying on the pearl ceramic tiles, her blue hair falling around her shoulders as blood pooled from the slashes down her arm. She ready to slip away. The razor stuck to her trembling fingers, and before her, transcendent, a hummingbird emerged to the fog and smashed through the window, the sound jolting her up. Her eyes still opiate sealed, the windows glistening with tiny cracks. She shifted in place and leaned forward, the hummingbird spasming before her. In her life, there was always a fog, and a bird with glass in its wings, and a body bloody like her niece fallen to the greenhouse. And she thought about that bird. Its ending, these endings surrounded by this rush of travelers, returning to lives she could never have again. She felt the same current she felt then as she lifted the bird up. Her blood merged with its blood. The hummingbird, confused, it was dying. How sad she felt holding it. That anger that she let someone almost break her, then stumbled up and set the bird down on the white carpeted toilet seat. The ending of its material passage opening like an orchid as she called the ambulance. And somewhere in the blue of her fading consciousness, visions of another bird jeweled with orange lights lifted her through the fog. No, she was not the girl she was then. Whatever was to come, it would not end by her own hand. They'd have to do whatever they had to do, and she would not wait. Not for them, not for another plane that may or may not come. She would do what she had to do, and when they came, she wouldn't be trapped. She wouldn't be at anyone's mercy. She would be a river that only an ocean could end. She rolled her bag to the terminal and exited the airport, the morning fog whiting out Houston like a blank page. Thank y'all.